Hi, everybody. So in this video, we're going to do practice problems related to taxes. So draw a correctly labeled graph of the gasoline market. And by the way, the one thing it says up here is pretty important. Gas is sold in a competitive market in which demand is inelastic and supply is elastic, relatively. Now, if when you draw this, it's a little tough to do that, to do the demand inelastic and the supply elastic. That's okay, but do your best. On your graph, show the price and quantity labeled PE and QE. So we're going to do this. Quantity and price. And it says demand is relatively inelastic. Oh, that was bad already. Demand is relatively inelastic. And then supply is relatively elastic. So we're going to do that. And just ignore my scratched out print. Price equilibrium. So you could see that it was going to be a little bit tough for somebody who even in theory knows what they're doing. Suppose the government imposes a $2 tax per unit on producers. On your graph from part A, show each of the following. So it's going to shift the S curve up by $2. So S tax. So that's going to be kind of like that. Now remember, it's actually a leftward shift. It's just kind of hard to see it because it's so flat. So it's a decrease, right? Supply is decreasing. And we have this is vertical by 2. Now it says the new price paid by the buyers is labeled PB. So that's going to be where the demand and the S tax curve intersect. So that's PB. And then the after-tax price received is labeled PS. Remember, the buyers and the sellers are not going to get the same amount in this one because it's a tax. And how do we find that? Well, it's down here at PS. It's a little bit below PE. Quantity is QT. I'm a QT. Using the labeling on your graph, explain how to calculate the total tax revenue calculated by the government or collected by the government. So this area, this box, is the total tax revenue. Now, we have to use the labels on the graph, so we just write an algebraic equation to say tax revenue, I don't want to use TR because that's total revenue. Tax revenue is equal to PB minus PS, or you could say 2 if you wanted, because we know it's 2, times QT. That's all it is. Will the tax burden fall entirely on sellers, entirely on the buyers, more on the buyers, less on the sellers, more on the sellers, less on the buyers, or equally? Explain. Now, if we use our graph and we drew it correctly, you can actually observe, the correct answer in this picture. But it actually just tells you up here that it's relatively inelastic and relatively elastic. That means that they're not perfect. Neither one is perfectly horizontal or perfectly vertical. So it's not going to fall entirely on one or the other. If, for example, demand were perfectly inelastic, then it would be all on the demand. But in this case, they're just a little bit, right? And so we can see that of this tax revenue box, well, who paid more of it? Well, PE went up way high to PB, and PE went down just a little bit to the PS. So it's more on the buyers. More on buyers and less on sellers because, right? And this can be your explanation. Demand is relatively inelastic and supply is relatively elastic. And I know that that may not even sound like it's a legitimate explanation, but that's the answer. You just have to say it's elastic or inelastic and relatively so. All right, hopefully this helped you. I'll see you next time.